Welcome to this week's Channing Memorial Church web service. This is our fourth broadcast, bringing a message from Channing Memorial Church to our community. Our web service message is for everyone who has an interest in or feels a connection with Unitarian Universalist theological perspective. So I'm glad that you have taken a little bit of time to join us today. As we always do, we'll light a flame in a chalice to begin our service time together. If you have a candle or a chalice with you, this is a time to light it, or be with me in spirit as I light this chalice. We light this chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, a faith that open to understanding the great religions of the world, recognizing this day the prophetic teachings of Jesus. Love of neighbor, the command to care for the least of these, and to the desire to establish the beloved community. With every day almost the same as every other day for most of us, we can lose track of the days or even the weeks. So, as a public service, a calendar check. The world that follows the Western Christian liturgical calendar is observing Holy Week, the time that is focused on the events of the last week of Jesus, his entry into Jerusalem, his throwing the money changers out of the temple, the Last Supper, his trial and execution, and his reported resurrection. So today, in recognition of the Christian roots of Unitarian Universalism, I'm going to talk about Jesus and how his story and message fits into the Unitarian Universalist tradition. Now I know some of you may want to withdraw or turn off this YouTube video when I say the word Jesus or talk about him. But I do hope that you will feel that you do not have to leave, but that you stay with us through this message. It is a fact that many Unitarian Universalists in our churches across the country have chosen to turn away from or disparage even our Christian roots and our connection to Jesus. Perhaps it's because a person has had a bad church experience in the past, or perhaps, like me, for many years, they became troubled with the doctrines and practices of the churches that were promulgated in the name of Jesus. For some, perhaps it is because they decided to follow a different spiritual path or no spiritual path and felt it was necessary to reject Christian teachings to be true to their new path. And for others, it may be because his life and his teachings cannot be proved by sources outside of the Christian Bible, and so therefore are not worthy to think about. As UU minister Reverend Stephen Kendrick has observed, nothing has ever been simple about Jesus. He confounded and confused people in his own time, and so it's no wonder that Unitarian Universalists today are still wrestling with him, his message, and the tradition that claims him as a God. Yet people who are attracted to a place of free faith, spiritual seeking, and non-dogmatic religion have much to gain by grappling with the legacy of this teacher, whose power and charisma seems undimmed from 2,000 years ago. If anything, we are only beginning to understand the radical nature of his message. So while Jesus may not be the center of our sermons or our adult and children religious education programs, the essence of Jesus is all through Unitarian Universalist ideas and principles. So to ignore Jesus is limiting to both our religious community and to individual seekers coming through our church doors. Ignoring Jesus' teachings and influence distorts our own past heritage, which is deeply steeped in Christian origin. And it closes a possible spiritual path for some people who want Jesus in their life, but not the Jesus of most Christian denominations. Our ancestor faith traditions, the Unitarians and the Universalists, emerge out of traditional Orthodox Christian denominations. The Unitarians came out of the Congregational Church, and the Universalists primarily out of Baptist and Methodist church traditions. However, the Unitarians and the Universalists of the 19th century did not reject Jesus or his teachings when they pulled away from their parent churches. Rather, they rejected the doctrines that had been layered over the early plain teachings of this itinerant prophet. Our famous 19th century Unitarian and Universalist ministers like William Ellery Channing, Theodore Parker, Henry Ware, Hosea Ballou, James Clark preached extensively about Jesus and his importance to us. Their sermons and those of dozens of other Unitarian and Universalist ministers that you may have heard in the 19th century presented the perspective that Jesus was human, not the second person of the Trinity. But in spite of that, because of his perfect nature and actions while on earth, he was nevertheless the perfect role model, the guide for us to reach our divine heights, the bridge between God and humanity, the flawless model of wisdom and righteousness and sanctification. They preached that the centrality of Jesus as a guide to a more religious life for us was not because of his communication of creed, but his ability to teach humanity how to live in right relations with themselves, with each other, and with God. And even as Unitarianism and Universalism brought in their approach to the religious message in the late 19th and early 20th century, at least in the churches outside of New England, Jesus' ethical teachings were still a foundation for Unitarian and Universalist ideas and ideals. The message of faith being presented in our churches was that, like Jesus' life, our lives, our faiths, need to be founded upon ethical principles. So, if we do not hold to the doctrines that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, that he did not have a miracle birth from a virgin, did not return to life after his death on the cross, what is there for us to see today in Jesus? The Reverends Rita Brock and Rebecca Parker, in their book Saving Paradise, suggest that, like our 19th century ancestors, that there is a lot for us to see in Jesus. When we look at his life and his actions as the champion for the poor and the disenfranchised, organizer and agent of social change, revolutionary against the empire, a prophet proclaiming the salvation in this life, a disruptor of the status quo, an example of human capacity for the good of all, creating salvation through a beloved community. With this perspective, we can see that his teachings and actions circle us back to the values and practices of our present religious tradition. And though we do not preach in our church about obtaining salvation from his death and resurrection, his spirit is nonetheless in our theological perspective. He is in our notion that we are to live a life based on ethics. He is the underpinning of our belief in the capacity of humans to be healed and whole. He is in our belief that the oppressed and marginalized need to have voice and power. He is the core of our theology that we are to always position ourselves on the side of love to level the playing field. And in our philosophy, that religion is about compassion, not condemnation, and about how to live, not what to believe. John Haynes Home, the early 20th century Unitarian Universalist minister, wrote that Jesus did not preach about dogma or creeds. Those were developed by men. Rather, he practiced a religion and wanted his followers to practice a religion as something not primarily to be believed, but to be lived. And as the Reverend Don Cooley notes, here's a man who healed the sick, fed the poor, fed the hungry, clothed the poor. He did something about the suffering he saw around him because he felt connected to those who he saw suffered. He did not care about. In fact, he had no knowledge of high theology and its statements about the fall of man, the inheritance of sin, damnation as the punishment for sin, the incarnation, the atonement. Those were later creations of men who were not satisfied with presenting a working religion, but wanted to make it something intellectual. Now, I do not believe Jesus is the sole revelation of the divine. I believe there are many avenues, both sacred and secular, that may lead us to revelation and truth about life. And I do not want Unitarian Universalism or Channing Memorial Church to become more Christian. It's just that Jesus' teachings have a message at their core that fits with our Unitarian Universalist perspective. And I want us to be willing to listen to it, as we also listen to the messages of other great religious teachers to guide our thoughts on how to live right. So be it. As we have done every week, I will now light candles as we join in spirit in a time of sharing. As I name some very important life events, I invite you to speak into the universe your specific life joys, your concerns, your sorrows, your gratitudes. A candle for our family and friends, both here and far away. A candle for completion of a task. A candle honoring the passing, the death of a family friend or relative. Recovery from an illness or an accident. An anniversary or a special occasion. For a birth or a birthday. For the support of healthcare and emergency workers that are daily putting their lives on the lines to serve the community. I want you to know that if you have a joy or sorrow or concern or gratitude that you would like to share with the community or the congregation, send it to me by email by this coming Friday, and I will compile them and send them out next week. I now invite us to settle back, to settle into our chairs, and to join together in a spoken meditation. This is based on a prayer by the Reverend Dr. Justin Osterman. Spirit of the universe, known by many names and by no name. It's hard to know what to say and what to pray when fear, sadness, anger, confusion, loneliness washes over me on the one hand, and I see and feel happy with the bright yellow trumpets of daffodils and the purple-blue cups of tiny crocuses in the gardens. I know this world is so beautiful, And I know also that it is so terrible at times. It's hard to know how to feel with all the wonder and horror happening at the same time. I read about people being so magnificent, and also of people being so selfish and wantonly ignorant. It makes me want to yell, "Thank you," into the universe one moment and shout, "What are you thinking?" the next moment. And all of this confusion around me in my own mind, though, I need to remember that I always have the power to choose how I will respond to life. I can let anxiety or fear or loneliness control my thoughts, or I can recall and reflect on things that are good and bright and funny in my life. So I ask, Power of the Universe, that the still small voice in my spirit that speaks of love, comfort, hope, mirth, goodness, and peace calm me when I feel agitated. And may that voice also push me to send good thoughts to friends and families, giving them support when they feel angst and anger, fear, disorganization, and being overwhelmed. And may I always choose wisely, act justly, live peacefully, and embody every value and virtue that I wish to see in the world. Amen. So now in closing, may we be cheered by the knowledge that we have a community, uplifted in mind and blessed in our commitment of care and love, to go forth with courage to meet the days to come. So be it. Now, before I close this recording, I have sort of two postscript items. If you would like to have some FaceTime with other members of the congregation, I'm hosting a Zoom chat this Wednesday at 11 o'clock in the morning. Let me know by email this Monday evening, that you want to be part of this conversation, and I will send you an invitation on Tuesday evening with the URL linked for the conference call. And secondly, I invite you to help me with the April 19th message. I would like to hear your reflections or meditations or poems on this most unusual time in our lives. Send them to me by email, and I will incorporate them into the message on the 19th. So now, keep mentally active, hold good thoughts, laugh when you can, and be safe.